So this one, I always just love this one. This is a kid who was talking about a healing heart and stuff like that, basically saying that it's the angels of the parent protecting them so that they're still around and stuff like that. Okay, so family dynamics. It causes changes, okay? And so when you think about all the different changes and things that occur, I always think of you expect certain things in your life. You expect you hope that your kids will be healthy and stuff. So my wife's cousin has 2 daughters, and both of them are congenitally deaf, and one has a very severe cerebral palsy, and the other one has a mild cerebral palsy. And so she focuses on these girls nonstop. The one who's 12 can walk only with assistance, and she's in her chair the whole time we push her around. And so I was up at a meeting in New York recently, and they were up there. They came from Miami and met us up there. And so we're pushing around the streets of New York and stuff like that, and she still has to wear her diaper and things like that. And so what happens is that she talks about how, wow, when all this happened, this really affected my life, because I wasn't expecting this. It affected the relationship with her husband initially, and then they kind of worked through it, and finally were able to kind of come back around and find the relationship again. But she says it really causes amazing changes, because now if she's going to go somewhere, she always has to think about it's got to be wheelchair accessible. Am I going to make sure that I have enough either diapers or something else? Do I have to have snacks because she's got a peanut allergy? So you're like got to watch. So she says it really changes everything you do. So anytime there's an illness or a death like that, it changes your whole life. Everything you'd expected, you have to rethink all that stuff. And there's the role reversal, which is what you guys heard me talk about a minute ago. Okay, so what do people do? Lots of different things, okay? And just because you do one of these doesn't mean that's the only one you're going to do. Usually people kind of go through various different ones. Reject the loss, you blame someone else, you avoid relationships. After that, you get people who say, well, I'm not going to get close to anybody because they're just going to die anyways, okay? So you want to be able to say, you know what, no, things happen to different people, but that doesn't mean it's going to happen always to you. But people will believe that. Let them go through part of that grieving process. And then you have to help kind of rebuild them and stuff like that. Carry on, try to handle the crisis, maintain open relationships. Some of these are healthier, some are not so healthy, but they're kind of things that people do. So this one is another one from the Dougie Center, which is really interesting. So which way do y'all think that heart is going? Why? I don't know the answer to this. I'm asking,
My initial reaction is start cold and break the heart.
Yeah. So you think it's falling and it's breaking by the grave, okay? Or is it by the grave and were they all the pieces and there's the kids healing, maybe their heart's coming back together? I don't know, okay? So this is the kind of stuff where you look at something like this and you're like, we can all make what we want out of it. Hey, look, there's a rain cloud, okay, but then there's sun here. Well, here's part of a rainbow, I think, or something, and then here's more rainbow over here. So how do we figure out which way it's going? Ask the kid. What's happening? And they may say, I don't know. Then you say, okay, me either. Jot a little note. I always turn the page over, I put the date, and I put what I asked them and what their answer was and stuff like that. Put it in the chart, and then about a month later, pull it back out. You remember when you drew this picture? What do you think was happening? And then sometimes they can recall it then, okay? So that's why you need to use not just talking, especially to kids. You really have to understand where they're coming from and use lots of other stuff. So now we're going to get into the different ages and what they understand. Okay, so preschool. We're going to break it up into preschool, school age, and then kind of adolescent things, stuff like that. So preschool age, they have no concept, okay? They just think that somebody disappears. So my little boy's 3 years old. And so if, let's say something happened to one of my family members, and I said, okay, well, they're gone, okay? They're, you could say they're dead, but they don't understand that because they don't have this abstract thinking. And what if you said something like, well, they went on a journey, or they went on a trip, or they're not coming back. So what do you think a 3-year-old would think? Well, they're going to be back at some point, and so kids will sit at the front door and wait. Well, they left, they come back. So then let's say you said that they went on a journey and the kids seemed okay with it, and then about 3 months later, the mother says, okay, I've got to go on a trip now for work, and I'll be back in a week. Kid freaks out and says, no, because when Daddy left, he didn't come back. Okay, so do you see how you have to be very cautious with the words that you use about kids? And you just say, they died. Depending on what you believe, you can say they, went to heaven, this or that. They think that it's temporary and reversible. If you say, oh, they went to sleep, or even if you say they died, and if they decide to go to the funeral and they see them in the coffin, if it's an open casket, then what happens? Sometimes the kid will say, well, wake them up. You're like, well, I can't wake them up. Well, why not? Because when people go to sleep, they wake up. And then if you say, oh, no, well, they're sleeping forever or something. Well, then you could create a kid who freaks out at nighttime saying, I'm not going to go to sleep because then I'll be asleep forever and I'll never wake up. So you see, you have to be very cautious about how you do it. And part of what it is when you talk with kids about death, it's a dance. It's very much so. You say something to them and you watch their reaction. So earlier when I said if you're preoccupied, if you had your own loss, or you've had something else, you're not going to be focusing on the kid's reactions as much. So what you really want to do is you want to make sure that if a kid says, if it looks like they want to talk about something like that, sit down, get down at their level. Don't like standing over them or whatever. Sit in a chair with them, sit on the floor with them and say, okay, well, let's see. And they can talk while they're drawing or whatever, because you have to really understand what do you think happened and see what the kids say they think happened, okay? If a parent dies, they're like, well, who's going to take care of me? They get sad by death as others are sad. So these are the kids is that they'll be in a room, let's say if you're after a funeral or something, and the kid will look around and everybody's crying, so the kid will start crying. Not because they're necessarily sad, because they don't have that feeling yet as to what the loss means. They're crying because everybody else is crying. So if the kids are out wanting to play, okay, you let the kids go outside and they're laughing and playing, and people are like, why can they be so happy? Well, you know, they're happy because that's how kids deal with things. They go out and they run around and they do stuff. They may not truly understand it. So I've actually had parents who will come in and they'll say, you know, well, so-and-so died, and they were like making jokes at the funeral, so I made them sit still and behave and just pay attention. And I'm like, well, okay, but that's not at their developmental level. So if you actually check, a lot of funeral homes now have areas where kids can go, okay? Like they'll have an outdoor little patio, or they'll have a little something where you can have the kids go, can run around. And a lot of them will do that because they understand that kids' levels and their understanding is very different. And they're also seeing as this, and they think that magical thinking is used. So if you have a kid who's 4 or 5 and says, Daddy, I hate you, I wish you were dead, and the dad drives to work and gets in a car accident and dies, magical thinking says the kid believes whatever they think is what will really happen. You remember if any of y'all had magic rocks when you were a kid? You have magic rocks when you're under 5 and 6 years of age, right? Because you believe the rock's actually real. I'm going to feed it, or I'm going to, you know, whatever. Okay, because we have magical thinking and we believe that things are real when it's not there. Okay. So what do you do with those kids? Sad, mad, glad, and the other thing is scared. You can always add scared in there, okay? Because it's kind of part of that, but you say it's okay to be scared. Let them express their feelings. If they're happy, let them be happy. If they're sad and they want to cry, let them cry. Just be there with them, okay? Encourage play, because that's what they do. And when I say play, play is any kind of play. I mean, that could be either outside doing stuff. That could be crayons. That could be the Play-Doh. That could be whatever they want to do. At the bereavement center, one of the really neat things is they have some of the rooms. If you've never been there, they have like the padded room and stuff where kids can go in and just, you know, they have one room that's really dark. You can hide. You can go and you can, you know, beat up a stuffed animal if you want. I mean, whatever you want to do. You got to figure. Each kid is different, and you have to have all those things there possibly for them to do. The other thing is be a good listener. Try to understand what they think happened. You just say that. What do you think happened? What does it mean when somebody dies? And you hear what they say, and then you can reflect that back to them. Because if we try to tell them what we think happened, we're using all this years of information that we have to try to explain to them something, and they may be at a much different simplistic level than we are. So you say, what do you think happened? And then you start from there, as opposed to starting from us. And these are just 2 more places that are for 2 of the other centers. Okay, so school age, 5 to 10 or 5 to 11. Okay, this is my favorite group to work with. This is a group that I always liked. They're very concrete in their thinking. So they're still confused about death. They still don't understand exactly what it is, but they sit there and they're like, okay, we know that it's final, that if somebody dies, we know they're gone for good, okay? But they don't believe it happens to everybody. And they're like, okay, I understand that if somebody dies, they're gone, but I'm never going to die. Okay, they still believe that it doesn't happen to them. 9 to 10, a little bit later in this age, they start realizing it's inevitable and it can happen to them. So at first they're like, it doesn't happen. But the questions that I love from these kids, if you actually ask them, oh, are you sad? They're like, yeah. How do they eat when they're in the coffin? And you're like, okay. And they're like, is it true that the worms come in and eat them? And they're like, does their hair really grow and their fingernails grow? And this is one of those that, this is not a good group to work with if you're not comfortable with those questions, okay? So when I would do my groups with this age group, we loved it because they sit there and I'd be like, yeah, the worms actually do come in. And so we start talking about that, like, and your hair grows, it grows really long, and your fingernails can grow really long while you're in there, because that still grows, but then the rest of you doesn't. And they're like, well, how do they breathe? It's like, well, they don't need their lungs anymore, because when they die, you don't have to use your lungs. So you just get very concrete, and you start talking to the kids, you start explaining to them what it is. And they're like, so if it's like happened right away, they'll be like, so now that they're dead, should I put some food in the coffin? I'm like, yeah, if you want to, but some people would be like, that's wrong, that's horrible. See what the kid wants to do, but you say, well, they don't need to eat it. They don't need to eat anymore. And then talking to a kid about cremation and stuff like that. That's that you get some very interesting things, and they'll be like, did the bones burn? And they go through all the different stuff. So this is the age group where they're going to ask you questions, and they're going to shock you, and they'll surprise you, and you just have to be able to go, yeah, I don't know. And they'll just look at you, and you'll be like, let me try to find out, but I don't know. So it's a really, really fun group. This is also the group, too, where it's really important. Is remember, with the young kids, I said, they're going to respond to our feelings. So if we're crying, they're going to cry. So you have to ask them a certain way. This is the group, though, you say, where are you? What do you think happened? But then you share your feelings with them, okay? It's really interesting that one of the girls, who I will never forget her, she was just a nice little girl, and her actually father had committed suicide. She was a 9-year-old little girl, and when we were in the group one time, and we were talking about it, and we went through the group, and it happened to be a day where there was about 7 or 8 kids, and nobody else had a suicide in there. And at the beginning, we would talk about, who was it that died, her name, and who was it that died, and what happened. Stuff. And she happened to be sitting right next to me. It was one of her it's like her 4th group. She hadn't said anything for the first couple. So it comes around, so I knew that, and I finally said, yeah. And so the person that I said that had died that time, I said, it was my cousin who had committed suicide. And she just looked at me. And I looked at her, and I was like, yeah. I said, it's no fun, is it? And she said, no. So she was quiet for a little bit. But then we started talking a little bit more, and she kept wanting to ask questions about, well, how did your cousin die? What happened? So I would tell her, and then she'd say, you know what my dad did? And she'd start to say that. And the rest of the kids who had not heard her speak for like 3 weeks or whatever were just enamored with that. And they were like, well, what happened? And they started asking her, and she was the shyest little girl, but she started opening up and telling this whole story about that. So then what we did is we got all this butcher paper, and the kids would lay down, and we would draw out their body, say, well, do whatever funny pose you want. And they would draw a funny pose, and you trace it on the butcher paper. And you say, okay, now draw yourself, okay, and then show me where it hurts, okay? And it was the most interesting thing. Where do y'all think she put that hurt the most on her body? Yeah. It was her big toe. I know, that's what I would have thought. I was like, oh, it's however her dad had shot himself. But the big toe. And I said, well, why? She's like, because every time I stubbed my toe, my dad was always there to make it better and make me feel better, make me laugh. She's like, so this is what hurts the most is my big toe, because now when it hurts, Daddy doesn't make it better. Nothing to do with their dad having been shot, nothing to do with the heart, with whatever, various things. It's just amazing. And so this is a neat group because you can learn so much from them. They're very concrete. They're very wonderful. So you got to ask them lots of questions. I learn more from them. I'm like, well, tell me, what do you think? What's that? What do you think's happening? And they get all excited and they'll tell you stuff. Give clear and concise information, okay? If you try to either lie about something or minimize something, they'll figure it out, okay? So be very clear about what you say. And then correct misunderstandings. We had one time, actually, that some kids were in my office, or a family was in my office, and this is a real tragic one, is that the one of the brothers was actually fairly depressed and stuff, and was looking at the family gun, and actually went off and killed his younger brother. And so the parents came in, and when people would ask, and the other kids, there's about 4 kids in the family, so the 2 other kids that it hadn't happened to, they're like, well, what happened? And they're like, oh, well, he died in his sleep or something like that, and whatever they had said to the kids. But the kids were smart, and they're like, no, because this brother's not saying anything, and this brother's not there, and he's, a wreck, you guys are a wreck, and the kids were like, something else must have happened. When you buried him, why didn't you have the casket open so we could see him? I mean, things like that these kids are going through, and the parents were just like, what do we ask? So I said, bring them in. We're just going to do a big family thing. We sat all around, and we talked about it, stuff like that. And what I told the parents beforehand, I was like, I think if they find out the truth someday, they're going to resent you for it. And so you correct some of these things. And so we talked about it as a group and improved the communication, and they were so supportive of the other brother. Okay, and said, we're so sorry this happened, but we're still your brother. We'll take care of you. Don't feel bad. I mean, it was a really amazing thing. So you have to really make sure that the misunderstandings, where are they coming from? Okay, it could be something simple, about them saying, now that the parent's gone, I'm not going to have any money, I'm never going to get to go to college, okay? And you say, well, let's talk about that later. We'll see what we can do. You know, there's lots of different things, but ask them, say, what are you worried about? And then address it. Answer their questions. If you don't know, just say you don't know. That's fine. Say, well, let's find out together. Okay? Don't talk down to them or ignore them. Don't think that they won't understand, and let them have choices. This is huge, okay? If someone dies, whether it's a sibling or a parent or whatever, and they need to understand this is the age group where they are concrete. Remember what I said? I said they like tangible things. They want to, do you breathe? Do you eat underground? You know, all that stuff. This is the one where they're going to want to be what they want, something to remember them by. And you say, what of their items, choose what is most important to you that you think is something you want to remember them by. And it may be something very weird. Okay? And there's a good friend of mine, both her parents died before she was 15. And when they asked her at 15, they said, they didn't actually ask her. They took everything out of the house, and they didn't give her a choice of anything that she could keep. They said, oh, we'll choose something for you. Okay, and she was still, to this day, she's like 45, and she's still very angry about that. But when I asked her, I said, well, what would you have kept? She said, the drapes. And I was like, what? I was like, the drapes from like the 70s? And she said, yeah. She says, because I know that they lived up in New Jersey. They didn't have safes or anything. So what my mother would do is she would take all her jewelry and she would put it in the hem of the drapes, and it would weight it down. But then burglars would come in and they wouldn't know that that's where all the jewelry was. So she always thought the reason that she wanted to keep the drapes is not because she wanted any of that stuff, because she knew those things were important to her mother, and she wanted to let those live on with her kids and things like that. It's very interesting. You never know what. Ask them. This one guy that I see, his grandfather had this is going to sound so weird. I still think, because this was just, his grandfather just died like recently. His grandfather did some taxidermy and had a skunk that he didn't stuff it, but he like created a puppet out of a real skunk. Okay, and so he would always go to the kids and be like, his hand in the little skunk, and be like, hey, what do you got? You know, and play with it. And the guy was like, it was the weirdest, creepiest thing. But when they said, what do you want? He's like, I want the skunk, because that makes me laugh and it makes me think of Grandpa. And I was like, that is so weird. And he's like, isn't it? It is weird. You know, and we would go back and forth about that. But he wanted the skunk, and he's like, yeah, I should bring it in one day. And I'm like, no, that's okay. I don't want to see the skunk that you're playing with. But that's what was important to him. So that's why you can never realize what it is.